Europe is like a big city. A place for all to live and work, move and meet, and enjoy life. Most of our people live in cities. They produce most of our economic output and also most of our emissions. That's why the future of Europe will be decided in cities. Yes, our world and our way of life are fragile. Good that our network of European cities is working for a better future for all in the city of tomorrow. Together, we are shaping the urban future.
Remember, the 5th of November, day 2 of the Eurocities 2020 annual conference, where we will be showing the way for a green and just recovery. As 2020 will no doubt go down and in history as the year of lockdowns and restrictions, 2030 and especially 2050 must go down as the years where the EU has finally reached its goal of being climate neutral. But how do we get there? How quickly can we reduce our CO2 emissions and by how much? The Parliament is pushing for 60%, which is encouraging. Still, member states are dragging their feet and haven't reached an agreement yet. Now, we would like to hear from you and your city ambitions for 2030 and 2050. So do let us know in the Slido poll that you will find to the right of your screen. And also let us know, what is the greatest challenge for your city to meet its climate ambitions? A lot of polls in one go, but it will be useful for the future discussion this session to hear a little bit from you as well. And more than reaching the goals, how will we also pay for it? The new EU budget, the biggest ever, promises to go somewhere in supporting the deep societal transformations which are needed. Still, it is likely to be just a drop in the ocean in terms of future investment needs. And everyone will need to think out of the box to reach climate neutrality by 2050. The green transition will not take off without massive financing capacity. In this session, we'll look at both the urgent and long-term investment needs in cities, possible solutions, and what cities can do together to pursue ambitious policy goals for 2030 and 2050. We will look at examples of successful business models for the future and how some cities have started to tackle the finance gaps ahead. We will identify our knowledge gaps to point us in the right direction of where we need to invest efforts in the coming years to boost a green and just transition in Europe's urban areas. So we will have first a keynote speech by Anna König-Hjelmeyer, Mayor of Stockholm and President of Eurocities, and then we will be able to discuss in a series of 3 different sessions with mayors, members of European Parliament, key experts, some of the key issues that will be needed to get Europe to a just and green recovery. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Anna König-Hjelmeyer for her keynote address. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul, and a big hello from Stockholm. And I am so glad to be here today to discuss this issue that couldn't be more relevant or urgent. And I'm sure that many of you have come across Chicago's former mayor, Rahm Emanuel, this year, and his word that never let a good crisis go to waste. And the quote may seem a little bit dated now, but I think still that it does still bear repeating. Because after all, crises allow us to things we once thought was impossible. And if ever there was a time to rethink the impossible, it's now. Because bold action was needed long before Corona. Not only are we running a risk of blowing past environmental tipping points, but many of our citizens too have not been able to fully participate in our economic and social and cultural life in these recent times, partly due to an asymmetric recovery from the last financial crisis, which makes it so important that we get this recovery right. And as cities, we bear a significant responsibility to making this happen, because after all, cities, as we all know, consume over 2/3 of the world's energy, accounts for more than 70% of global CO2 emissions, and generate 85% of Europe's GDP. Accordingly, we do have significant tools to our disposal to reduce emissions and limiting resource use. And I'm proud that European cities have long been a forefront of the green transition. And I look forward to going into more details on some of our efforts these coming 2 hours. In my city, Stockholm, we have already managed to reduce CO2 emissions by capita with 58% since 1990 to around 1.9 tons per capita. And during the same time span, Stockholm has grown with around 300,000 people. And since 2000 alone, we have increased our GDP by almost 78%. And to me, this shows that ambitious climate policies and economic prosperity can go hand in hand. And I believe this is a crucial message, not least in the context of a post-COVID recovery. And it's a message that also is supported by a host of recent studies, including studies from the universities of Oxford and Cambridge, that show that including investment in green mobility solution, carbon sinks, renewable energy, and building retrofits bring higher long-term savings than traditionally stimulus programs. It creates more jobs and also provide higher short-term returns. Ideal, with other words, for a moment like this. Unfortunately, there are some worrying signs. According to research just published by the climate network C40, only approximately 3 to 5% of all the trillions of dollars in international COVID stimulus funding has been committed to green initiatives. It is true that we are in a much stronger position in Europe, but even here we face real challenges, starting with the proposed EU recovery plan. The plan has rightly been hailed for putting a strong emphasis on climate action, but we must not overlook that the calculated investment needs on which this plan is based derive from the current 2030 climate target. And as we all know, a 40% target would not allow us to prevent the most harmful effects of climate change. We also must not forget that Europe will remain one of the main financial backers of fossil fuel at a global level, with annual subsidies of around 60 billion euros. And these subsidies pose an obvious challenge to a green recovery. But luckily for us, it is possible to look at them in a different light. After all, simply redirecting existing funding streams from fossil fuels towards sustainable solutions. That would be an enormous green stimulus in itself. And let us also look at the green potential of company cars, for example. As of today, 60% of all new cars in Europe are purchased by companies. These cars tend to be used twice as much as private cars. And they also make up the largest share of used cars in the European market, usually reaching the second-hand market within 3 years. This means that the cars that the companies purchase today will have private owners tomorrow, making it so important that companies quickly transition towards zero emissions vehicles. As of today, over 95% of newly purchased company cars run on diesel or petrol. And European governments subsidize these purchases with around $30 billion euros every year. And this is obviously a problem. But it doesn't have to be. By some very simple changes to the tax code, we could ensure that companies use the subsidies to buy zero-emission vehicles instead. A few measures would be enough, in other words, to take some huge step towards transforming our transport sector, which just goes to show how much is possible if we put our mind to it and real political will. And in the meantime, our cities as mayor and also as a role of public procurers to not, of course, we can use that role. Also how we create policies also in the role on our own fleet, but also when it comes to transport logistic. Starting next year, for example, we can see that the company Volvo will put fully electric heavy transport vehicles on the market, providing new opportunities for green urban logistics in our cities. And with that said, the rollout of electric vehicles will, of course, also heavily depend on the deployment of public charging infrastructure, renewable energy and grid capacity across Europe. And with that said, it is clear that the European climate law and eventually 2030 climate target will be decisive in determining the scale of European green recovery. And I believe that we as mayor owe it to our citizens to stand up to a European climate framework that meets the urgency of the moment and turns the goal of the Paris Agreement into a reality, which is also why I want to see opportunity to say thank you to our colleagues from the European Parliament for showing true leadership in this question. And my friend and colleagues, I could go on for much longer, but I think we all know what is at stake and what the issues are. So without much further ado, let's start the debate.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, for setting the scene there with a lot of ambition. And obviously cities are also somewhere stuck with the ambition of their member states, of the European Union as well. So they can do a lot, but they are also within a framework, and it's important that that framework moves forward and allows cities to develop their climate policies. And I would like you to stay with us. And as we are joined by Margarita Marquez, a member of the European Parliament, Susan Aitken, leader of the Glasgow City Council, Ritva Viljanen, Mayor of Vantaa. We will be first discussing the questions around EU and cities in climate policy. What needs to be done at national and EU level? I would first like to hand over the floor to Margarita Marquez, because ultimately all of these big transitions and transformations require investment. Can you tell us a little bit about how climate policy will be funded in the future within the European Union?
Okay, hello everybody from Lisbon, the European Green Capital 2020. And I'd like to congratulate Eurocities for this regular and annual event, and also to congratulate its president, Anna Koenig. And for me, it's a pleasure to be here as co-rapporteur on the MFF, multi-annual financial framework at the European Parliament. Is a pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss these points with you. We are living one of the biggest crises of the recent history, a crisis that has to be managed collectively, but needs the cooperation and the support of the local level. Only with you, the measures established at national level to mitigate the effects to this virus can be enforced effectively. Moreover, it's at local level that there is more awareness of the effects of the crisis, from inequalities, unemployment, support to companies and communities, etc. An inclusive, sustainable, and resilient recovery won't be successful without the support of local level. The next EU long-term budget and the next generation EU are the main investment tools at EU level to support a sound and green economic recovery. It will only be successful if there is a strong commitment of all levels of government and the engagement of citizens. There is a commitment to accelerate the transition toward climate neutrality. Therefore, we need to channel investments toward the neutrality objective. Negotiations on the MFF are ongoing, but there is a strong commitment from the European Parliament side to have a methodology for monitoring the 30% climate spending and its performance. The Recovery Fund, Next Generation EU, should have a similar target. On biodiversity, the institutions are working together on a methodology and a target, the exact figure yet to be defined. The European Green Deal is the new growth strategy for Europe. It is important to adapt cities to this new growth strategy and to see the involvement of cities in the key EU policy developments, such as the climate law, EU adaptation strategy, and the development of national investment programs. The EU budget and recovery and resilience facility give a unique opportunity for investments linked to European Green Deal, as well as to promote urban planning and also administrative reforms. It is important that at local level, the challenges and priorities are well identified as well as the existing bottleneck. EU funds should be channeled to risk mitigation and adaptation, to flood mapping, biodiversity monitoring, and to diversify energy supply sources. The Renovation Wave is a European initiative in which cities should play a role. A refurbished building stock will help on the decarbonization by reducing energy consumption. The renovation should not only be in private buildings, but on the public sector. The public sector should be the driving force in energy efficiency. In order to increase resilience, it is up to you to channel the EU funds to systems of data and to develop instruments to integrate climate change into management and mitigation models. Knowledge and data are key to prevent future disasters and to better manage the impact of climate change. Many times, I hear that local authorities do not have the capacity building to apply for projects to develop them. Unless you come from big cities, it's very likely that you are faced with some barriers. Staff without the necessary skills, human resources not aware of information, lack of data, for example. You should work the national governments to ensure that we have enough financial resources to update skills of public administration, to invest in quality data that will allow to prevent disasters and to manage them better, funding to work closely with universities and companies of your regions, and above all, to work on common projects because climate change is better taken when done together. Common platforms of information is a tool that for many and many years I have been advocating. Ladies and gentlemen, this crisis will have impacts on the economy and on the societies. It will increase inequalities and disparities. Nevertheless, I would like to stress that we have a European response and Europe has a vision. It is up to all of us to work together so that the funds are used properly and that they benefit citizens and not interests. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Margarita. So not just a question of investment, but also a question of channeling the funds in the right direction and ensuring that cities and local players have the right capacities to take them up and create change. So we will go straight away to some of those actors. Maybe in Glasgow, I'd like to go and see Susan. What are your targets then in Glasgow, and how do you see this interplay between your level at Glasgow, the UK, and the EU in this context?
Thank you, Jean-Paul. I'm delighted to be here from the proud European city of Glasgow to speak at this Eurocities conference. Eurocities will continue to be a really important network for Glasgow, a valuable space for us to share and collaborate, particularly as Brexit joins COVID recovery and the climate emergency as our city's critical challenge. Eurocities can help us and other member cities plot that path to a resilient and collegiate future. So a year from now, Glasgow will host the UN Climate Change Summit, COP26. And that's pushed us to the forefront in the conversation about the role of cities in addressing the climate emergency. And it's clear that cities are where the race to net zero carbon will be won. Nation states pledge, but cities deliver. And the voices of cities will be heard and understood in Glasgow next November. But as we've heard, national governments and international institutions must respond critically with real investment and resource to deliver change. What's also evident from these conversations is that responses to the climate emergency and to the COVID pandemic are inextricably linked. And that means a recovery that creates the necessary economic stimulus, adapts to and mitigates against climate change, and addresses the deep-rooted social issues that are being exacerbated both by climate and COVID. And as COVID responses show, though, cities can change faster and more fundamentally, perhaps than nation states can, and even more than we previously attempted or thought. And we must grasp that momentum. So if I can give two brief examples, Glasgow has a carbon neutral target of 2030, a huge challenge for a post-industrial city with the physical and social legacy that leaves. 70,000 Glaswegians live in our traditional housing stock of sandstone tenements built before 1919. These have huge historic, architectural, cultural and urban value, but they also have very poor thermal performance and they're expensive to heat. So working with the University of Glasgow and one of our community-led housing associations, the city council that I lead is currently working to retrofit an entire tenement of 6 apartments to passive house standards. And the early progress on this is very exciting. Once extended right across this type of historic housing stock, it would hugely reduce the carbon emissions caused by domestic heat, tackle fuel poverty among tenement dwellers, and create thousands of skilled jobs. Our river, the River Clyde, was once a global centre of industry, building the ships and machinery that made Glasgow the workshop of the world. But until recently, it was a toxic and derelict reminder of our high carbon industrial past. That has changed. City life and economic activity has returned, but not at the scale or speed that our citizens want. And it is still home to some of Scotland's most deprived communities. So with an acceleration of industry, innovation and investment focusing on the River Clyde, we have one of Europe's biggest opportunities already primed for the recovery agenda. Unlocking the potential of the waterfront means reinstating historic areas of derelict land, addressing emerging flood risks through investment, and capitalising on the river's renewable energy potential. So shovel-ready projects like that will help to drive recovery, but they must also address the macro challenges. The whole systems approach of stimulus, adaptation, mitigation, social justice, and inclusive growth must underscore the green recovery. My critical point, though, is this. Climate change already threatens to have a disproportionate impact on the poorest communities, those who contribute least to greenhouse gas emissions, but are also least able to prepare, respond and recover from its impacts. And COVID is exacerbating that. That is as true on a city scale as it is on a global level. And there are deep and genuine concerns about the impact on jobs that an economy moving away from its dependency on fossil fuels will have. We need to protect workers from the shocks of transition and to maximise the opportunities for the future workforce. Our transition to carbon neutrality mustn't leave people and communities behind. So in Glasgow, we have established a Just Transition Commission to focus on the most vulnerable and create opportunities and routes into the trades and professions that a more sustainable economy will demand. To conclude, colleagues, The green recovery must be mainstreamed into all that we do as cities. Housing, transport, digital, economic development and growth, and citizen engagement. It must also address other emerging challenges and opportunities, from Brexit to artificial intelligence. And it can't be undermined by short-termism or by a dereliction of leadership or by an unwillingness of nation states and international institutions to get behind local government and cities who are actually delivering practical change on the ground. But crucially, it must deliver the fair, just and inclusive cities that our citizens deserve. Unfortunately, obviously, we weren't unable to meet in person today, but I hope that I can welcome as many of you as possible to Glasgow next year. COP26 is an incredible opportunity to add momentum to all of our current ambitions and encourage us all to try harder still in pursuit of them. It must be the point at which the world looks beyond COVID, takes stock and resets our planetary future on a safer and fairer course. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing other colleagues' contributions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Susan. It sounds like for you, indeed, that the green recovery has to be just because it is inherently just. If it weren't green, it would just not be just, as far as I can hear. So, and also a lot of ambition, which I can also echo from the Slido poll. A lot of you are really ambitious on these climate targets with the climate neutrality by 2030. Is that the same in Vanta, Ritva Viljanen? Do you also have a strong target by 2030 or 2050?
Thank you. Yes, it's very much like our strong target. But thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. And this is very important issue. I can see it every day, even today, because it's absolutely too warm in Vanta. This is our problem in Finland nowadays. But it's we should have the first snow, but still the flowers are blossom here, and it's really odd. But dear colleagues. The cities have a globally significant role in fighting climate change. On a city level, there are certainly many actions to done to implement the European Union's climate policies. However, we can't do it alone, and I will look at this issue from the viewpoint of a growing city. In fact, Vanta is the fastest growing city in Finland. Vanta is also one of the pioneering European cities whose aim is to be climate neutral by 2030. So here it is, 2030. I'm happy to say that in 2019, Vanta's greenhouse gas emissions decreased almost 10%. The main factor to this was the decrease of emissions from the district heating. Vanta Energy Company, owned by the cities, will give up use of coal by 2022 and from use of fossil fuels by 2026. So it's going very rapidly on. But even though we will give up burning of fossil fuels, we will still burn the waste and biofuels. They will continue to produce carbon dioxide emissions. As the city grows, the use of energy grows as well. There are solutions, for example, by improving the energy efficiency of buildings and by using more renewable energy. But here we come to the importance of national and European Union level actions. These are processes that the city can't do by itself. Let me give an example of good cooperation between a state and a city in climate issues. In Finland, Vanta is one of the first 4 cities who this year signed the National Green Deal contract with the Finnish state on emissions-free construction sites. The aim is that by 2025, all construction sites in these cities will be fossil fuel free. This does have quite an impact. In Vanta, the construction site machinery causes about 5% of all emissions, on the top of the undesired effects such as noise. In a growing city, there are many construction sites. With this deal, the cities don't have to think all the solutions by themselves. Instead, the state gives concrete advice on the actions that need to be done, the timetable, and how the impact can be measured. In addition, in a growing city, to be able to implement a fossil fuel-free traffic system, the city must cooperate with the other cities in regional and state, in the regions and the state. The state must fund the building of a sustainable infrastructure for walking, cycling, and public transport. Vantaa has started to design a light rail system, and both of the state and European Union funding are essential in infrastructure projects on these proposals. Otherwise, essential climate goals will not be fulfilled. The European Union has the possibility to act as an example in climate issues. To be able to secure this, the cities need strong support from the European Union and the member states to fund various innovations and pilot projects in the cities. The corona pandemic has put a toll on cities' economy throughout Europe. Therefore, it's essential in the current recovery plans and their focus into green transition that cities are included. It can accelerate the success of ambitious climate goals of European cities. So we have the ability for a great impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ritva. And I would like to maybe then bounce back on some of the comments that were made. And I hear that public procurement could be one of those key areas where cities have a major role to play. Susan was talking about housing policy. Anna, can you say a few words about public procurement and how cities can really be driving change on climate policy through public procurement tools, and whether EU or national rules can somehow prohibit major steps being taken by cities in this area? Anna, if you could unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Let's see.
no problem.
Yeah, of course we can do a lot as cities when it comes to procurements, because we can see that consumption-based emissions are a large part of our total emissions. And of course we see that with when it comes to retrofits in building, that was already mentioned, but also of course we often mention all the daily serving of foods in our schools and nursing homes for elderly, for example, and there it should be nutritious, but of course it also should be climate friendly. And when we build and plan the city, we can do a lot, like also to really push for more buildings in tree buildings, and now we are actually building skyscrapers made of tree and wood here in Stockholm. So we can actually do a lot. Also when it comes to heavy transport and logistics, and when it comes to our construction sites. And then we are very active together with the business community to say, okay, how can we get to fossil fuel-free construction sites? And we can see, as I mentioned now, that we have this big companies as Volvo saying we can do this already at 2021 in the cities on a global scale. But then we need recharging infrastructure. And that is also one main challenges for our cities. Because I think that many citizens now today ask for electric cars or hybrid and wants to be a part of the transmission. But if they can't charge the cars in the city, then they will not buy an electric car, of course. So it's up to us really, with the other actors of the business community, to plan the infrastructure in our cities, both for private cars but also for heavy traffic. And I think EU can do a lot with funding also to support these transmission, because it's about the grid capacity to strengthen that, and that is expensive, but of course also to make sure that we have the recharging infrastructure, because I think this is transmission will go so much faster than everyone thought from the beginning. It's actually happening now. And if you talk to the different authorities or different companies that strengthen the capacity, they said that we need to plan how we produce more capacity with the grid. It takes 7-8 years. So that's why we all have to plan today for the city of 2030, and we have to do that very, very fast. But of course, also to have this infrastructure in our cities that the citizen can actually charge their electric cars now, because then we can have fossil fuel logistics and construction sites in a city in a much faster than we thought.
Okay, thank you. And maybe just a final word from Margarita Marquez on this public procurement question, because you mentioned the 30% climate earmarking, climate policy earmarking in the budget, but don't you think also public procurement could have specific rules that give incentives to cities in their markets to favor greener options? Maybe a final word, like one or 2 minutes.
No. Okay, yes, the answer is yes, but I like to raise a point, because normally we say 30% of the money must be oriented to climate targets. But it's important to say that the 70 can't be used in fuel and against climate targets. This is a key point. And this is clear, this must be clear for example, the action of the European Investment Bank, EIB, must be also a guideline for the European Central Bank and, of course, for the public procurement.
Okay, thank you very much. So thanks to all of you for having joined us for this first part of the discussion. And as we're on this topic of investments, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into this issue, and also to look at how to finance some of the gaps in climate ambitions. And we are joined by Robert Westerdahl, who is a partner at Material Economics, and who will give us a little bit of an overview of how to close these finance gaps in climate policy. So, Robert, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. And can you please turn on my slides? If
yes,
I can also...
we will upload the slides straight away.
No worries. No, so before they come up here, so I'm Robert Westerdahl, based in Stockholm. We're a small consultancy started 4 years ago, based from a number of partners at McKinsey. We are working on climate action with a number of different leading companies. We're also working with national governments, and I have spent a lot of time working with cities across Europe over the last 2 or 3 years. And I'll just give a brief presentation, and there's quite a lot of course, material here that I'm very happy to to explain in much more detail. But I'll give you a high an overview of what some of the main insights are from the work that we have done. And this work, some of the results we will present, is based on work that I did together with a team with the European Union Missions Board for Climate Neutral Cities that was prepared for the report to the European Commission that was released a couple of weeks ago. But we've also worked over 2 years with EIT Climate Kick and together with Tomorrow Cities partners on basically quantifying the economics of the climate transition for about 10 cities across Europe. And we are currently working with 2 cities, and we have a long queue of other cities that are working on this. But the whole essence of the work that we have done is to translate the climate targets, ambitious climate targets, into very specific economic assessment of what these climate targets actually mean from an economic perspective, both in investments required, impacts on energy costs, but also impacts on health, air quality, noise, and so on, and how the overall societal economics look like for ambitious climate action. And that's, of course, very much inspired of work that we have done with many private companies that, of course, need a economic assessment of all actions they need to do, regardless of what area that they are working on. So let me just share a couple of insights from that. And I'll also wrap up with a couple of kind of recommendations going forward, or what we at least see is kind of the important insights from this work and what it can mean for cities going forward. So first of all, together with the EU Missions Board on Climate Neutral Cities, we developed a extremely ambitious trajectory by 2030 to kind of how can a city reduce emissions from transportation system, from buildings and heat generation, and from electricity generation. So it's basically scope 1 and 2 emissions. We did not include scope 3 emissions in this analysis, but so it's only focusing on scope 1 and scope 2. And we did that analysis. This is based on work that we've done with about 10 different cities, but we increased then the ambition level quite significantly of climate targets to be able to reach close to zero emissions in these sectors by 2030. And this is kind of, this one can kind of regard this, of course, as a theoretical exercise, but we looked at kind of what are all of the different kind of actions that need to happen in a city to make this happen. And we did not only look at what a city needs to do, but what all different stakeholders in a city need to do. So citizens, private companies, property owners, and so on, to basically reduce all of the emissions that arise within the city boundaries. So we came up with a realistic or a very ambitious but still realistic scenario of how to reach close to zero emissions by 2030. But then the question is, of course, how can one get there? So what we looked at, and this is just a very high-level summary, but this is basically for a, if we call it an average European city of about 100,000 inhabitants. These are the investments that would be required across transportation, the building stock, the heat generation, and electricity generation to reach this target. So about 961 million euros by 2030. And this is for a city with about 100,000 population. And this is, of course, it's building on kind of all of the different actions that need to be taken within the transportation system on improving public transport, electrifying the vehicle fleet, building out charging infrastructure. It's about renovating the building stock, decarbonizing heat generation, and so on and so on. And this will, of course, vary quite significantly across different cities. But this is kind of when we looked at an average across kind of many of the different cities that we have worked with. And I think just getting that as a starting point is so important, just to understand how much is actually required. But then it's also, of course, important to understand who needs to do what. Because of these investments, the cities, when we did the analysis for many different cities, the cities actually represent a very small share of these investments. Many of the investments need to happen from property owners, from private utilities, from citizens that own cars, and so on and so on. So basically understanding in a quite a granular way who needs to do what investment is, of course, part of this. But then we did this also on an aggregate level to show what is the total investment need. And then, and this is a quite complicated slide, but what we also did, which I think is extremely important for the whole narrative and how to kind of really explain why should a city act ambitiously on climate, aside from that it is the right thing to do from a global perspective. What we also found was that it is also the right thing to do from a city perspective. We looked at what are all of the investments required, as I just mentioned, but we also then looked at how will that affect energy costs in a city for citizens, for building owners, and so on. But we also looked at how will it actually impact health costs, from improved air quality, increased physical activity, reduced noise, and road accidents. And actually it turns out that from a societal perspective, the economics of this transition is actually positive. So that is, of course, an extremely important insight that a city should do this regardless of if it reduces CO2 emissions or not. This is economically rational to do, but then it is, of course, very challenging how to succeed with this. And I think from our view, when we did this work, and we have basically produced these type of curves analysis for several different cities. And then, of course, the big question comes, how can one translate this into what does it mean for our climate strategy, for our work going forward, and how should we then integrate this perspective into what projects do we drive, how do we engage with private financing, how do we engage with our citizens, and how can we get this to happen? Because it is economically rational to get it to happen, but it's not obvious how one can succeed with it. Because there is, of course, a lot of complexity behind, how one really can achieve a change like this. So we did this as we could call it kind of the starting point.
Maybe just one more minute, Robert. Try and yes. Go towards wrapping up. Thanks.
Excellent. I will wrap up. I can actually go to the top. No, so what we did was basically when understanding the fact base. I think that's just a starting point for then kind of how to put together a portfolio of projects and initiatives and how to integrate this in the climate strategy for the city, and how then to engage with citizens, with private financing, with companies and other organizations in the cities and also across cities to start to build then the kind of both financing and implementation strategy that how can one make this happen. But I think our viewpoint was that having at least a sound economic fact base of how this transition looks like and what is needed was really required to then be able to build a credible pathway going forward. How can one then realize this? Because of course the how to realize it is very different when you look at the transportation system, the building stock, energy, electricity, and so on. Yes, so let me pause there. Very happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. It's a shame that you say that it's difficult to know how to get there, but it makes perfect rational sense to get there. But it's not so easy to know how. But you also point to very clear sectors in transport, heating, and buildings. So let me go straight to Belit Onay, the mayor of Hanover. Do you recognize these sectors as being key in your transition in Hanover?
Yeah, thanks to the round, and I'm very pleased to have this opportunity today here to discuss this important issue. And thanks to Robert Westdahl for this very important presentation. And yeah, it's totally clear it's not easy, and it's getting even harder over the past few months. The coronavirus crisis has turned our priorities absolutely upside down, and we suddenly have to take emergency measures for the health of our citizens, and also to ensure financial viability. At the same time, the pandemic has highlighted our vulnerability at the same time. Today we are facing COVID-19. Tomorrow we could be facing a natural disaster if we do not act now to mitigate climate change. And so despite the coronavirus crisis, we must not lose sight of our global challenges. I totally agree at that point. Like mentioned in the keynote, I think also there's a chance in this crisis. In the last few months, we've seen that there's a chance to see new ways to find new solutions for the challenges we are facing. And Hanover has a long-standing commitment to climate care, but how can we finance our climate ambitions? That's one of the difficulties we see at that time. And in the recent months, the city's revenues have totally collapsed. And at the same time, we have adopted three aid packages worth almost 40 to 50 million euros to face the challenges. This will have long-term consequences in the terms of the city financial room. But we are still going to invest to ensure the city's ability to act and react, its viability and its cohesion. We have to explore all options and all opportunities at that time. The current crisis clearly shows that the local authorities are fundamentally underfinanced, and this is one of the problems we have to face. They have more and more responsibilities, but they do not receive adequate financial compensation, either from national or regional authorities. This is something we urgently have to address, and I'm very happy that the EU funding was addressed at the same time in this discussion too. In addition, it's more important to have the possibilities to get more contact to the EU funding, more opportunities we can solve by EU funding. For the time being, Hanover lacks certainty regarding its eligibility and the amounts available. I really do hope that the Eurocities lobbying activities and related initiatives of cities at national level result in direct and adequate EU funding of cities' efforts. Last but not least, I firmly believe that part of the solution lies in actively encouraging the initiatives, the local private initiatives, like mentioned by Robert Westerdahl. The initial impacts of climate change would be at local level, so it's important to join forces locally, and for us, it's a city. It's important to support the private sector, the private stakeholders at the same time. And just one point to illustrate what I mean is maybe I will just show you two examples.
Very briefly, please. Very briefly.
Yeah. There's like one climate alliance in Hanover we have with like almost for 12 years with all the relevant stakeholders, the companies, the different actors here, the foreign network in Hanover. At the same time, on the other hand, we have a corporate association which is building up an eco-village or tiny living project, and this is like 500 small and low-cost flats, like also a social issue we try to face and to handle here in Hanover, just to mention like two short examples from Hanover. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Belit. And you're talking about dwindling city revenues. Robert also mentioned the fact that it's not always in the hands of the cities. It sometimes depends on the change of other actors who are living in cities. If I go to the mayor of Tallinn, Mihail Kolvat, how are you then addressing these financial difficulties to create the right incentives and investments for Tallinn?
Yes, hello, dear colleagues. I want to bring out one aspect in the EU funding system. That is a problem not in Tallinn, but probably also in other European cities. It's clear that there is no lack of innovative solutions and technologies necessary for the changes. But cities and other local governments lack the financial capacity to use them. Today's EU granting system for cities is mainly project-based and fragmented between different programs and actions. This system is designed for traditional urban projects but cannot drive ambitious green transition. Cities need integrated long-term solutions that cover a wide range of areas, developing green and blue infrastructure, planning sustainable mobility, fighting social injustice, and more. Single sector EU funding does not support the necessary integrated investments. It creates too much red tape and increases the administrative burden of the cities. Yes, the different crisis recovery measures proposed by EU do have a more integrated approach, but these are still short-term and focus mainly on ad hoc solutions. We need a new form of funding for urban green and just investment plans that delivers the EU support directly to cities in the form of more innovative and integrated financing. By the way, yesterday, Vice President Šefčovič asked for ideas how European Commission can support the cities to be better prepared for the future. So one possible solution is that EU support should be provided to cities in a package. For example, based on approved SECAP action plan and associated budget. This approach would give cities the opportunity and security to implement the long-term green and just transition strategies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A clear statement there, more integration. I'd like to just go back also to Stockholm and see Anna for also just a comment on this question of the integrated funding. I think that's just a key point that maybe you could elaborate on in a minute, please. Anna. If you can unmute yourself as well.
You know, that is a crucial comment, of course, that we have to all these recovery plans now, both on an EU level but also on national level, that we really engage the cities, because the cities has been hit the hardest by the pandemic. But of course, also here are the main challenges when it comes to the CO2 emissions. And I feel more than ever that we are listened to, and I think that was a great example that the national leaders actually asked, how can we engage the cities more now in these type of issues? So this is just a proof for me that we are playing a huge part now in the future developing on the recovery and on the financial issues as well.
Yeah. Okay, and that maybe is also work for Eurocities to imagine this city package, you know, in the framework of the European funding, more integrated funding. Thank you. And now we will go to our third panel session, if you like, mini panel, where we will be looking at really the aspect of the just recovery, so that we're not only looking at green, but also just. And Susan Aitken, the leader of Glasgow City Council, already made that point very strongly. But I would like her to just focus a little bit more on this transition phase. And then we will be joined by Päivi Laijala, Mayor of Oulu, Jeanne Barseguian, Mayor of Strasbourg, Belit Onay, Mayor of Hanover, Catherine Habenschaden, Deputy Mayor of Munich, and Hélène Dromain, Vice President of Grand Lyon. So, Susan, over to you, just to make that quick point briefly on the green and just recovery, to really insist on that aspect of just.
Yes, absolutely. I think the COVID pandemic has crystallized to this. If we didn't know already that greenness and fairness had to go hand in hand, then the COVID pandemic has brought that into very sharp focus. I think that it's a city like Glasgow, which has this post-industrial heritage, which carries with it long-standing and deep-seated social issues, and where we've seen in recent years considerable economic growth, but economic growth that hasn't touched the communities that need it most and the citizens who have been left behind. And therefore, it isn't the kind of economic growth that we need. It hasn't been inclusive, and therefore, actually, it hasn't helped our agenda. If we were to undertake a carbon transition, if cities across the world and nations indeed were to undertake a transition to low carbon in the same way that economic growth has been pursued in recent decades, then it will be a failure. It isn't enough simply to transition away from our high carbon past. That is incredibly important. But at the heart of this, the climate emergency, it isn't something abstract. It is something that impacts real people and real people's lives, and people, particularly in the global south, but also often the poorest communities who live in the least high quality land in cities in the Western world and in the north of the globe is suffering loss and damage now. So if we undertake a transition to a wonderful, shiny new low carbon economy, but it doesn't impact those individuals, then it will be a failure. And in 10, 20, 30 years time, we will look back and we will spend all our time debating how we do it better when we have the opportunity right now to do that transition and bring those citizens with us. As a city which has considerable numbers of people living in poverty, I feel very uncomfortable talking to those people about changing their behaviour and changing their lifestyle. We often talk about tackling the climate emergency in terms of lifestyle change, of doing things differently personally, but that involves choice, and poverty takes choice away from people. So we need to understand that the people who most need us to deliver the change have the least wherewithal to make that change for themselves. So the just transition has to be an enabling transition. It has to be about creating the conditions for citizens who have the least wherewithal to make the changes, or making the changes on their behalf, rather than lecturing them or saying you have to do this. That's fine for people who are more affluent. That's fine for people who are able to make the choice to buy an electric car, for example. It's not fine for the half of the citizens in my city who don't have a car, who rely on public transport. So our focus, while in Glasgow, and Anna made the point very strongly earlier about the infrastructure required and the planning that's required to allow people to make the transition to electric vehicles, for example. But if we're not also decarbonising public transport, and prioritising that just as much, then we're going to leave people behind. If we have neighbourhoods that are disconnected from the jobs of the green future, then they're going to be left behind. So I think all of those considerations have to be taken into account. My final point would be, again, on this point of procurement. And often I do think the EU procurement rules do stand in the way, not just of the green transition, but also that combined greenness and fairness, to undertake procurement exercises which prioritise jobs which are secure, which are decently paid, which have security of contract, which have opportunities for career progression, for example. And I think that cities and local government need to have the ability to say no, not just on the basis of pure monetary value, but on the basis of social value and environmental value. And the EU, and I say this as a city which, against its will and very reluctantly, is no longer an EU city. I hope that will change in the near future. We would be delighted to rejoin the European Union at any time. But I think the EU needs to empower local government to say no to investors, to employers, and to others who are not living up to those standards, or combined standards of sustainability and fairness. That would be a very powerful tool, I think, that would drive forward that just recovery right across Europe and beyond.
Thank you, Susan. And so it won't be enough to be climate neutral by 2030, but you're also advocating for a strong target policy on reducing inequalities as well. That the two go combined. It won't just come from climate neutrality. Maybe we can go now to Oulu, which is, I think, the capital of the digital era in many ways. How are digital tools also supporting this transition towards a greener and just recovery?
Hello, my friends, here from Oulu, and the north of Finland and nearby Christmas Father home, as you know. And so, like Ritva Viljanen told, that we don't have a snow here in Finland. So, the city of Oulu has a goal of being carbon neutral by the year 2040. And we speed this up in many ways, and we have outlined these activities in our environmental program. The program works as a guideline for urban environment related activities, focusing on what the city can do and also what we can do to help our citizens to reduce their carbon footprint. The third dimension is how the city can help companies to grow by creating new green and digital production and services. From the just transition point of view, the main issue in Oulu is peat. Unlike many other European cities, the city of Oulu owns Oulun Energia, on a municipal energy company providing energy services as well as central heating from homes and businesses. Today, wheat is important resource of energy for central heating here in the north. However, we are well on our way to replace peat with renewables, mostly wood chips. City of Oulu has also made an investment of 200 million euros to the new power plant. The tradition is on its way. To make a just tradition, we need to look at the whole value chains. Peat industry is an important part of our economy, especially in the rural areas where economy already face challenges. Industry can transform, for example, by going from harvesting peat to wood, but it needs public support in making the investments to new equipment. The companies need financial support, and we need to help them innovate new services on this side. The employees need education and new processing and equipment. Also, most of the people using the end product are regular people with regular homes and regular income. We need to make sure...
Maybe just moving towards the conclusion, please. Last minute.
Okay. We need to make sure that the cost of the tradition is now not too heavy on them. We need to use the Just Tradition Fund, the RFF and other EU instruments to renew the whole value chains of sustainable and carbon neutral energy production. And we need to make sure that the tradition is just and far for businesses in rural area to end using in the cities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pavy. And we go straight to Strasbourg, where we meet with the Mayor, Jeanne Barseguian. Jeanne, you have really 2 minutes. Please, please, please.
Hello to everybody. Thank you very much in organizing this moment, despite the difficult conditions. To answer your question, for me, a green transition in Strasbourg will be fair and democratic, or it won't be. After my elections, a few months ago, the first decision we took with the City Council in Strasbourg was to declare a state of climate emergency. Why? Because the ecological emergency is there every day in our cities and for several years now. But today, the climate change is combined with strong social and economic consequences of the health crisis. And we, European cities, are in the front line. And so transformation in our cities, in our territories is urgent. What are we going to do in Strasbourg to achieve this fair transition and recovery? We have the chance to have a very high potential to succeed in this social and ecological transformation in Strasbourg. And we also have the chance to have this European and cross-border DNA. But my objective as a new mayor of Strasbourg is to multiply the solutions in the city. And I will give you 3 examples. First example is making renovation of buildings. It is a priority for Strasbourg because this strong investment from our city will aim in particular to reduce energy poverty, will improve access to efficient houses for people with low incomes, and also will create local jobs in the buildings sector and while reducing our carbon emissions. So it is the first example. Second example, of course, we want to invest more in the development of ecological transports to reduce territorial inequalities by developing, for example, a new metropolitan train, and also developing the existing tramway lines that have shaped our city for many years. We are also going to offer social pricing for public transport to young people under 18. And we also want to reinforce our position as France's leading bicycle city and develop our bicycle highway network. The third and last example, it is implementing a vegetalization plan and remove concrete in the streets and in the schools, playgrounds. It is a priority to lower the temperature, to raise children's awareness, and also to contribute to the mental and physical well-being of our citizens. So finally, I am deeply convinced that this transition cannot happen on its own and must be based on cooperation at all levels, especially with the European cities facing the same challenges, and also including all levels of governance and all stakeholders, especially citizens. And I just want to say we are in Strasbourg. We launched a Europe Agora, bringing together all Strasbourg local stakeholders to work with us on public policies. And one of the objectives of this Agora, for example, is to prepare a significant contribution of Strasbourg citizens to the next conference on the future of Europe. So I just want to say, in France, we had this yellow vest protest, and it showed us that the green transition must be fair, or it will only increase crises and inequalities in our cities. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, there's a strong consensus, it seems, around the concept that green and just go together. We go back to Hanover. Bilit Onay, for a quick comment. Very, very short. 1 minute.
Okay. I'll try. So, Jean mentioned, I think this is something we have to think when we think about facing climate change, and try to do it fair and with more justice. So we have to think it as a cross-section problem, and we see that there is it's a change of life, like mentioned, and we see this at the heat supply, the electricity supply, but also at mobility, transport, more bicycles and everything else. There is a change, and the project from Hanover, like the Eco Village project I mentioned, is also, and different projects we have, similar projects we have in Hanover, are intended to achieve ecological, social, economic sustainability and climate neutrality. And beside these projects, in the area of housing, we see that in Hanover we not only have housing projects to set ambitious energy goals and efficiency goals, but also percentage for social housing, for example, around 30%. And there the rents are capped, and we see that there's this is what, like 25 to 30% of dwelling units are planned as social housing with these rents. And this is something we have to think together. I think this is a cross-section project, and we have to think it as a cross-section issue in all cities.
Okay, thank you very much. We now move south to Munich. Katrin, a comment from you. Also, please, 2 minutes maximum.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. Don't stress me too much, but thanks for the opportunity to show our Munich way how to reach the green transition to be just. In my opinion, a green transition must be just and inclusive on the other side by putting people first and by paying attention for the industries and for the employees who face the greatest challenges, especially in the situation right now. For investment opportunities to be sustainable in the cities, we must take into account the economic model, of course, we want to follow in the future. There will have to be an economic model that replaces the previous resource-destroying, climate damaging, and antisocial model, of course. To me, a successful green transition is going to hold the potential of sustainable economic growth, job creation, and social well-being, often forgotten. This will, to me, require creativity, of course, and innovation, but technical innovation can contribute to this, but it cannot be the only solution. In fact, massive financing capacities are required to this topic. The city of Munich makes, for example, large-scale investments in urban infrastructure in order to be able to cope with rising temperatures, with climate change, and the population increase in Munich. But nothing new. The consequence of dealing with the corona pandemic is that the municipalities, Munich as well, will have fewer options for action, as the municipal budgets expect major losses in tax revenue in the near future, especially in the coming year. Nevertheless, the city of Munich has set the ambitious target of reducing the city's energy-related greenhouse gas emission to 0.3 tons of carbon dioxide per inhabitant by 2035. That's ambitious, we know that. So in this way, Munich wants to take a leading role in enabling a fair economic transition to a low carbon society. And this transformation must be based on knowledge, of course, on a shared vision and be guided by precautionary principles. It relies on pioneers of change, as we call it, who are testing and promoting new development opportunities. In addition, the transformation requires space that we don't have too much in Munich, that opens up to opportunities for development. It needs to set the course for necessary structural change and to ensure the implementation of climate-friendly innovations. And this cooperation between the international community, as well as the establishment of structures for global policymaking, would, of course, be desirable and helpful. But above all, the green transition, in my opinion, is a cultural issue. Society must be ready for the measures that will be taken towards a sustainable community. And in order to take society with you in solidarity, much more real participation has to take place. That was my quick shot over to Munich. Thanks for your attention, and I really appreciate the discussion and every single statement. Thank you so much. Jean-Paul.
Thank you, Katrin, and apologies for stressing you. And I have to stress one more person, unfortunately. Hélène Dromain, Vice President of Grand Lyon, you have also 2 minutes, and apologies in advance for the stress.
Thank you for the stress. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you today, even online. I'm Hélène Dromain, newly elected at Lyon Métropole as Deputy President for International and European Affairs. I choose to participate to this conference because the subject is exactly what we are on. How can we finance our green ambitions while helping to recover from the pandemic crisis? Even though we did not yet reach the recovery phase, we are still dealing with preventing a social and economical breakdown. I don't know if you are familiar with Lyon Métropole, but we have the particularity of having both social and economical legal competencies. It's an asset to have an overall strategy toward to lead an economical transition where we represent 59 cities, 1.3 million inhabitants. We were elected to improve air quality, sustainable mobility, create new and better housing, reduce territorial inequalities, and adapt our city to climate change. It's not different than Strasbourg's program, for example. We are in charge of distributing the solidarity income. The number of beneficiaries has exploded the last few months. It's our responsibility to seize this opportunity to create useful jobs for local production. Our role is to stimulate the current trend toward greener actions. I have no doubt that the trend is here. We must push and help lighthouse projects. For instance, we are transforming our economic development agency in order to guide sustainable companies. We will not longer help China's company to set up in Lyon, for instance, but focus on structuring the textile sector, the bike sector, or the food production sector. We were elected in July, so we will have to wait before I can share our successes. But I can already explain one of our projects to you. One of our biggest investment priority is for energy efficient renovation. Like, as Robert told, it's one of the most important financial cost. As you probably know, Lyon's
One more minute, please.
Yes, it will be less than that. As you probably know, Lyon Metropole and Lyon as town are managed by the Green Party. We was before just a few part of a coalition, but in charge of one important project called EcoRenov. This project helped financing renovation of housing and co-ownership. In 4 years, 8,000 buildings have been renovated. The amount of the financial assistance to each beneficiary depends on the ambition of the project and the resources of the people who request assistance. That would be the core principle of our action. The public sector has to take its own part on both green actions. The most vulnerable people must be taken into account and we must support them. The private sector shall take part in the action thanks to the leverage created by the public sector. When I talk about the public sector, it's at all levels, local, national, and European. Finally, we are all aware of the emergency. It's now time to act. I will not go into deeper details. I hope I will be able to present you more concrete solutions in the next conference. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Hélène. So there's a very strong consensus emerging there between many mayors across Europe on the need to have a green and just recovery at the same time and the measures to be put in place there. So thank you very much to Hélène, Catherine, Belit, Jeanne, Päivi, Anna, Mihail, Ritva, Susan, Margarita, Robert as well for having joined us this morning. And I will now hand over to Annalisa, Secretary General of Eurocities, for her summary remarks of this morning's discussion. Annalisa, over to you.
Thank you very much. It was so interesting and so full and dense that it's not going to be easy, but I'll do my best. So, one thing, nothing is impossible. That's clear. Time to rethink the impossible is now, right? So, let's do it. Second, a good crisis should not be wasted, right? But if it's not used in a way that sees greenness and fairness go hand in hand, it will be wasted. So green transition means inherently a social transition too. 3, local authorities alone cannot succeed. Nation states alone cannot succeed. Europe alone cannot succeed. There is a strong need to, for a joined up and coordinated action, both on the policy and the financing levels, for instance. On the policy, we have the Green Deal, we have the, EU procurement, making sure that EU procurement supports, this combination of social and green. We have the climate law, we have, you name it, huge. We have the, all the directives coming out of the Green Deal, as I said. They need to make sure that they impact in the right way at the local level and are built together with the local level. On the financing level, again, the three levels have to be there and work together. It's the financing thing is the big issue, is the most urgent thing to address, but it's not impossible. There is a full rationale behind it in investing in green. It's been said, but it's not easy. There is no, one off-the-shelf solutions on it, but there is a way forward. Now, on the EU level, the new EU budget dedicates 30% to climate, but at the same time has this 70% with where the principle of the do no harm the climate is present. So it gives us hope. But on the recovery and resilience facility, this is a parenthesis I make. Remember, next week it will be voted in the committee. So please, as mayors, all the people that are listening here, please do coordinate with your MEPs and try and support all the amendments that ask that cities should, receive the funding, and that the funding should go where it's mostly needed, meaning in cities. So please remember this recommendation. Now, in terms of the financing, yes, a city package. We are asking that for a long time, an integrated package. I mean, we've got a fragmentation, of course, of funding in terms of the EU. So we would welcome something that is integrated, and a way that we, as the person from the economics said, we have proposed that around the idea of a mission on climate neutral cities. 100 cities that should be supported by the EU, by the national and the regional and the whole, levels of governance, to support a holistic transformation and an integrated, transition. And that was mentioned by Tallinn, for instance. That's really fundamental. We cannot anymore think of a transition that is sectorial. It needs to be absolutely integrated and holistic. And therefore, the funding has to follow in that respect. Finally, yes. So if supported and considered as partners, cities can be the place where the whole transition, both green and social, can actually happen, and happen for the whole of Europe, since the majority of population is there. Why? Because as Anna said at the beginning, all the issues and the solutions are present, but the main problems are concentrated in cities. But also because cities can bring innovation in governance, working with and for everyone. So having everyone on board in all situations, without being, patronizing anybody, but really trying to make the transition enabling for everyone and cooperating with everyone. In innovation, in organization, so in the public sector, because they can move to a systemic and integrated approach and planning. In financing, because they can apply financing schemes that are place-based and can ensure greenness and fairness at the same time. And finally, and that's my last thing, they are ambitious. I mean, all the objectives we've heard around the table are all higher than some of the member states that are discussing in the council and are just dragging their feet. So let's hope that this will happen. But anyway, thank you very much. And I hope I've not forgotten anything that is key. If yes, please, apologies.
I don't think so. I think you were very complete with your overview. A call for action to mayors on this vote in the European Parliament, and this essentially
and to apply for the mission on climate neutral cities. I want to see them all.
Okay, two major calls for action then. And this essentially closes our third session of the annual conference. So thanks to all of you who joined us, whether it was yesterday or this morning. We will reconvene in some 5 minutes just to change a little bit the setup for the Eurocities AGM, the formal part for members only. So those of you following on Facebook or via the Eurocities website directly, goodbye. Thank you for having joined us. I hope you enjoyed these 3 sessions. And for Eurocities members following on the event page, bear with us. We will be back in a few moments. So thank you very much, and see you next year. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Europe is like a big city, a place for all to live and work, move and meet, and enjoy life. Most of our people live in cities. They produce most of our economic output and also most of our emissions. That's why the future of Europe will be decided in cities. Yes, our world and our way of life are fragile. Good that our network of European cities is working for a better future for all in the city of tomorrow. Together, we are shaping the urban future.